I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and this is my co host, veteran Imagineer Jim Shule.
Hello, everyone.
And you may have guessed from our show opening that today we're going to talk about the revamped 15-story tower that's about to reopen its doors at the Disneyland Resort. As we record this edition of Disney Unpacked, we are just days away from the official ribbon cutting at the Pixar Place Hotel.
And you know what makes Pixar Place so special is, well, this reimagined hotel, it's a celebration of the characters and the stories created by all those talented artists up there in Emeryville, California.
Got it. And more to the point, given the many hit films that Pixar has produced over the last 30 years, well, that's a pretty deep bench to pull characters and stories from.
That's true, because
Mhm.
creating a Pixar themed hotel is
Mhm.
it's a lot harder than it looks. And I actually know because I was the creative director for the original Pixar hotel, which was Toy Story Hotel, located over in Shanghai Disneyland. Having said all of this, do you have a date for the opening of the Pixar Place Hotel?
My understanding is it's Tuesday, January 30th. And mind you, I've been following this project since the Walt Disney Company first announced it back in April of 2022. That's when they revealed that this 15-story building was going to be revamped.
Oh, and yeah, and according to the press release, which is came out from the company, the reimagining of this hotel, well, to quote them, will weave the artistry of all Pixar characters into a comfortable and contemporary setting. Having read that, Jim, I find the use of the word contemporary in relationship to this hotel, well, it's an interesting choice of words. I find it even maybe slightly amusing.
And why is that?
Well, simple. This hotel, in one form or another, has been on this same site for nearly 4 decades. That's 40 years.
Oh yeah, and you're not wrong. This hotel was first called the Emerald of Anaheim. After that, it was the Pan Pacific, then the Disneyland Pacific Hotel. After that, it was the Paradise Pier Hotel, and now finally, Pixar Place.
And all of these names are just for one single building. And a surprising number of these names, well, they all involve the letter P.
That's particularly puzzling, don't you think?
Oh, please deliver me from punsters who love their thesauruses.
Okay. All right. When Mr. Schul and I were pre-gaming this specialty dish edition of Disney Unpacked, we decided to use the official reopening of Pixar Place to take a look back at the history of this hotel because there have been some interesting developments in this corner of the Anaheim Garden District over the past 6 decades, and not all of those developments were done by the Walt Disney Company.
Well, it's obvious why they weren't because they didn't
Mhm,
own the land. I mean, they
mhm,
somebody else owned the Disneyland Hotel. They owned the
mhm,
land, they owned the name, they owned the building. Disney couldn't have done anything if they had wanted to. But,
mhm,
there's a reason for that. And we all know what it is really, because Walt Disney had the money to build his Magic Kingdom, Disneyland. What he didn't have the money for in his little wallet was enough money to build his hotel,
mhm.
so that he could have all the day trippers who came down and stay there overnight. And so he turned to a very good friend of his, somebody who was in the business, who had a bigger wallet, his good friend, Jack Rather.
Now, understandable here because both these men were pioneers in the early days of television. More to the point, because the Lassie TV show, which the Rather Company produced, was such a huge success, Jack had the available cash to build a hotel right across from Disneyland. So Rather agreed to help Disney out.
Now, you know what? I may get letters right now for what I'm about to say, but I'm going to walk out on a limb here and offer my opinion that when the Disneyland Hotel first opened back in October of 1955, that hotel was really more of a motel rather than a hotel. I mean,
Mhm,
after all, look at these photographs.
mhm,
Anyone who drove through Southern California during the 1950s and 1960s, they'd be driving by a collection of small, low slung 2-story wood and plaster buildings. They look like every other motel in Southern California at the time, except for the fact that they had the Disneyland Hotel name out front.
got it. Now, but just as once the Disneyland, the Disneyland, the theme park, proved itself to be a success. Walt, of course, began investing heavily in that family fun park, aggressively expanding the place. Well, Jack Rather basically did the same thing across the street from Disneyland.
Yes, exactly. He added an 11-story building to his campus. And I
Mhm,
would argue at that point, that's the day that the Disneyland Hotel turned from being a motel into a full hotel. And
mhm.
also, here's a fun fact. When that building was opened, it was the tallest structure in all of Orange County.
And let's not forget about those Japanese themed reflecting pools that Rather had built at the base of this new tower. I mean, and Walt clearly appreciated what Jack was doing at the Disneyland Hotel because just the year after this tower came online in August of 1963, Disney decided to extend the monorail from the park over to the Disneyland Hotel.
True, true. But you know what? If we're going to be very honest here, we have to acknowledge a lot of this expansion and reinvestment in the park and the Disneyland Hotel. Well, it was because that the audience for Disneyland had grown beyond Southern California. It had grown beyond California. It had
Mhm,
started to attract visitors from around the globe.
mhm,
And I'm not just talking about, people in Europe. I'm talking about people in Japan who are now packing trips all the way across the Pacific to
mhm.
visit Walt's new fun park.
Yeah, and which, to sort of double back to what we were just talking about, explains those Japanese themed reflecting pools. It's worth noting, by the way, that Jack Rather wasn't the only owner of a venue in Southern California who made a deliberate play for the Japanese tourism market. Take, for example, the Japanese Village, which opened just down the street from Knott's Berry Farm in this it was 1967. This Buena Park tourism spot was modeled after a similar attraction in Nara, Japan. Here you could hand feed miniature deer, not to mention take part in an authentic tea ceremony, which was held inside of a full-size recreation of a Japanese pagoda, which then overlooked a beautiful pond full of rare golden carp and black swans.
I know that sounds really attracting to tourism. However, like a
Mm,
lot of the families, my family would be driving in our car all the way down to Disneyland, and we'd be gliding right past the Japanese deer park. I mean, it didn't matter that they were serving tea and
mhm,
had black swans. Disneyland was the greater draw, and
mhm.
really, honestly, that's the reason why that Buena Park attraction finally closed down to the public in 1975.
I guess not enough people wanted to stop to feed the deer.
Or drink tea.
Mhm.
Anyway, anyone who works in the theme entertainment, the leisure entertainment industry, they really know that it doesn't matter whether you have a great idea. I mean, obviously, you hope the ideas are great, but the reality is it's very competitive. And unfortunately, it's been that way from the very, very beginning. And a lot of things didn't, succeed.
Well, getting back to the thing that did succeed, Disneyland and the hotel in Anaheim, there was next to the Disneyland Hotel open land, land that would be developed into a hotel that would then target the Japanese tourism market we just spoke about. That hotel would be called the Emerald of Anaheim, and it would open in May of 1984.
Although it's important to note here, Jim, that the Emerald of Anaheim, it wasn't built by the company who you would think would have built a hotel right across the street from Disneyland.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious candidate to build such an enterprise would have been the Oriental Land Company, the Japanese consortium that owns and operates the Tokyo Disney Resort. But instead, the Emerald of Anaheim was built by the Tokyo Group. This was a group of Japanese businessmen who already had a pair of hotels in Hawaii and saw an opportunity to grow their brand by building a new hotel directly across from Disneyland Park, one that would specifically designed to cater to Japanese tourists who wanted to experience Southern California.
And another reason to open the Emerald in May of 1984 was, well, it was because the city of Los Angeles, they would be hosting the Summer Olympics
Mhm.
that very same year.
Yeah, and more to the point, a study had been released which projected that Southern California was just not going to have enough hotel rooms to handle all of the people who'd be pouring into LA to attend those summer games.
Yeah, so the two groups saw the opportunity. If they got the Emerald Hotel open out ahead of the 1984 Summer Olympics, the Japanese tourists who were flying into LA to attend those games would then stay at their brand new spanking hotel, which
Mhm.
just so happened to be right across the street from Disneyland.
And with the thinking here being that after the games were over, these same tourists would then fly back home and evangelize to friends and family about the great new hotel in Anaheim that had been specifically designed and built to cater to Japanese tourists.
And you just can't argue with that logic. It's sound. All of those decisions that led up to opening the Emerald of Anaheim were good ideas. In fact, it was a great hotel and it advertised itself as, well, Anaheim's stylish alternative. But
Mhm,
anyway, the hotel opened in May 25,
mhm.
1904, which was just 2 short months before the summer games got underway in Los Angeles. And the hotel, it did very, very well initially.
Initially, okay, that sounds vaguely ominous.
Well, initially, it's a little bit more than ominous in this case because in 1986,
Mhm,
well, the nation of Japan was hit by not one, but two huge financial crises.
mhm,
First was the Nikkei, which is their version of a stock market, the Japanese stock market. It dropped and it
mhm.
dropped hard. Overnight, millions and millions of yen vanished, completely gone. And that were people's savings. That's what they would use to go someplace like a Disneyland or go to the United States. But it was followed up by then a collapse of the entire Japanese real estate market. So
Okay.
strikes.
Yeah, woof. Okay, so let me guess. On the heels of that pair of financial crises, Japanese tourists decided to postpone discretionary travel, like any plans to travel to the United States, which then would have meant that these very same folks would have canceled any reservations they might have already made at the Emerald of Anaheim. And again, it really doesn't matter if this brand new hotel is wonderful and located right across from Disneyland. If people don't have the money to go to California, which had the spell trouble for the Emerald of Anaheim, and if people just weren't gonna spring for expensive travel.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what happened in a nutshell. The Toho company did what they could to keep the Anaheim Hotel open. In fact, even went so far as merging the Emerald Hotel chain with their other hotel chain, which was the Pacific Hotel chain.
Which I'm betting is why the Emerald of Anaheim got a new name in 1989.
Yeah, right on the button there. Yeah, that's why and when it became known as the Pan Pacific Hotel. The Walt Disney Company, well, they'd finally purchased the hotel, the Disneyland Hotel, from the Rather Corporation. And
Mhm,
Michael Eisner, who we've talked about once or twice in the past, and
mhm,
may again,
mhm,
but now he was free to act on his desire to take all of the land that he now owned both at the hotel and Disneyland Park itself and
mhm.
create a Walt Disney World level destination resort there in Southern California.
Got it. Which is why in May of 1991, the company walks out its plans for Westcott, which was this $3 billion project that included, Disney's plans to build three brand new hotels around the periphery of Disneyland's old parking lot.
Yeah, but the weird thing about that, and maybe it's a funny thing about that, but they had this idea and they walked it out to the public. They were going to build this
Mhm.
three new hotels. But one of those three hotels was on land that they didn't own because one of those three hotels was going to be on the site of the Pan Pacific Hotel, which they didn't own at the time.
Well, if we jump ahead a little bit, the company would finally acquire the property formerly known as the Emerald of Anaheim in October of 1995. They gave the Tokyo Group 35 million for the property and then promptly renamed the place the Disneyland Pacific Hotel.
Yeah, but the downside was that in January of that very same year, which was, as we said, 1995, the
Mhm,
company had by then abandoned its plans to build the Westcott Resort at
mhm.
Disneyland. and instead opted to start development on Disney's California Adventure.
Now, that project wouldn't officially be announced till July of 1996. And this proposed expansion of the Disneyland Resort, rather than being budgeted for 3 billion, was now a far more fiscally responsible 1.4 billion. Again, less than half of what the company had originally planned when it was looking to turn Anaheim into a Walt Disney World like destination resort.
And $1.4 billion, it may sound like a lot of money, but it just wasn't enough to cover the complete teardown of the Disneyland Pacific Hotel. There was money left in the kitty to change the hotel, but not to start over.
Which had to have been a real challenge to the Imagineers who were designing Paradise Pier, given that this 15-story tower was going to loom right over this part of California Adventure.
Looming is a great term because it was. I mean, that tower was 15
Mhm,
stories, solid
mhm,
concrete, and it was directly across the street from what they were going to build as their new resort.
mhm,
The fact is that the Disneyland Hotel had some of the same issues because it also had tall towers. In fact, they had three towers.
mhm,
The advantage Disneyland Hotel had was it was set back from West Street. So
mhm.
whenever there was an issue about visual intrusion, the solution was just simple. It was always add more trees. However, since the Disneyland Pacific Hotel had been built right on the sidewalk of West Street,
Mhm. Now renamed Disneyland Drive.
yeah,
Mhm,
that's right. I mean, anyway, long story short, you just couldn't hide the 15-story tower behind a bunch of trees. There was no place to plant them.
mhm,
So the Imagineers went in another direction. They decided rather than ignoring the Pacific Hotel, they were starting to embrace the Pacific Hotel. And the solution to that was to rename the Pacific Hotel the
mhm.
Paradise Pier Hotel.
Now, worth noting, once this idea was on the table, the Imagineers made a sincere effort to make the Paradise Pier Hotel look like it had always been a part of Disney's California Adventure.
I love the term you used of being sincere because it sounds
Mhm,
so easy, but you know what? It's a lot harder than it looks because the Emerald originally had been designed to cater to Japanese tourists, and
mhm,
therefore it had 502 tiny, tiny itty bitty rooms. And I
mhm,
know from experience just how tiny and itty bitty those were because, well, once Disney bought that hotel, I was part of a group that went to stay in the hotel. I mean, basically scope it out. And
mhm.
they were tiny. They had a great restaurant downstairs, but the rooms, they were tiny.
Okay. And let me guess, it was a Japanese restaurant.
Yes, yes, you got it again. Anyway, when it came time to really reimagine the Disneyland Pacific Hotel and transform it into the Paradise Pier Hotel, the challenge was to make it look like it was part of Paradise Pier.
Mhm,
So the solution was paint, lots and lots and lots of paint. Not a
mhm.
significant change, but a cosmetic change.
Well, now that said, though, there was an interesting structural change. I mean, what's fascinating is when Disney begins calling the shots at the Pan Pacific, the room count at the hotel actually drops. It goes from those 500 tiny, tiny rooms you described to 481 rooms.
Yeah, exactly. This was all done to give that hotel a few larger rooms.
So suites, that sort of thing. Okay, got it. But as for creating some sort of visual connection, with the Paradise Pier in the park and the Paradise Pier Hotel, you mentioned paint. So we're talking about this is largely done through the use of color, right?
Right, and it wasn't just any paint. The paint palette was really chosen to complement the color palette of over in Paradise Pier, which is right across again the street.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
they did go ahead and they did add some wave crate shaped crenellations that ran the length of the rooftop of that new hotel.
Well, I actually love this detail because here's the thinking. All right, the hotel is supposed to be down by the pier, and the pier is next to the ocean, and ocean have waves. So it's like, okay, so you put wave shaped crenellations at the top of the building. I get it.
Yeah, waves were not a reach. I mean, but it did connect the two
Hmm.
hotel to the land. Uh,
Hmm.
and oh, as long as we're speaking of connections, you remember that there was a plan once to build a bridge over Disneyland Drive.
Hmm.
And that would allow the guests who were staying at the Paradise Pier Hotel to directly enter California Adventure. I mean, they announced the bridge, but like all things, well,
Mhm.
at least a lot of things,
Mhm.
projects are announced, but they just never ever happen. And that was the case with this bridge.
Yeah, though it's worth noting that people staying at Disney's Paradise Pier did eventually have their own private entrance to that park. Now, mind you, it involved first walking down the sidewalk, crossing Disneyland Drive, going up to the entrance of California Adventure, showing the guard there their Paradise Pier Hotel ID. They were then directed to this weird little path that was between the Grand Californian and the backstage of DCA, and they would eventually pop out next to what, the Corn Dog King stand?
Yeah, Gauntlet doesn't begin to, describe this path. I mean, they found a lot of guests who made the left when they should have made the right and ended up
Mhm,
back by the trash dumpsters. But
mhm,
signage is great. Anyway, long
mhm,
story short, I mean, I know from experience that I'd walk out of my room every morning at the Paradise Pier Hotel, and I'd take that path, the one you just described. And I finally relied upon my nose. I mean, whenever I approached DCA and I started smelling the fresh roasted fried corn dogs coming out of the fryer, I knew I had arrived.
mhm. Ugh, yeah, yeah, I'm sorry that just thinking of doing that first thing in the morning, would not be my choice for breakfast. But all right,
Teach his own. Teach his own.
there we go. All right. Anyway, Paradise Pier Hotel didn't keep that name for all that long.
Yeah, that the hotel we keep talking about, it changed a lot over the decades of its existence, but it
Mhm,
wasn't, it wasn't done yet with change. And it's a
mhm.
change we started talking about the start of today's show.
Okay, so again, we're talking about hotel formerly known as the Emerald of Anaheim, now becoming Pixar Place. But I guess people are going to ask,
Mhm.
why was it necessary for this hotel to change yet again?
And that's a great question to ask. And it's a good and straightforward answer that I can present to you. And
Hmm.
the answer is right across the street. Because
Hmm.
you see, the Paradise Pier Hotel was an extension of Paradise Pier itself. All the language, the visual cues, they were all based and predicated on Paradise Pier.
Hmm.
But the problem is that in June of 2018, Paradise Pier disappeared.
Hmm.
It was no longer there. It became Pixar Pier, and the connection between the Paradise Pier Hotel and Pixar Pier, the land, was broken.
There we go. And obviously, keeping a hotel at the Disneyland Resort that celebrated a land that's now closed at one of its theme parks, that couldn't have made any sense. So, obviously, new story conceit needed, and one that now keyed off of Pixar's characters and stories. Now, where this gets interesting is that prior to this week's ribbon cutting grand reopening of the Pixar Place Hotel, the company had opened two hotels that were based on Pixar films. There was, as you mentioned earlier, the Toy Story Hotel in Shanghai Disneyland, and then there was the Toy Story Hotel at Tokyo Disneyland.
This is true, except that both of those hotels, while successful, well, they were kind of focused on only celebrating one single Pixar franchise, which is, of
Hmm.
course, the Toy Story movie franchise.
Hmm.
Whereas the Pixar Place Hotel, which is about to open in Anaheim, it has a much larger charter. It's going to be celebrating everything about the Pixar studios, all their movies, all their characters, all the people who worked on these products over the 2 decades now. It's a far bigger vision than the one that Toy Story Hotel followed.
Now, just now looking at the official press release of Pixar Place, which describes this 15-story tower as the only fully Pixar themed hotel in the United States, which it seems like a strange claim to make, given that Disney's Art of Animation down in Florida that has the Finding Nemo wing and its car themed wing. Though, I guess considering that the other 2 wings of that resort are Little Mermaid and Lion King themed, okay, now I get it. It's this one, the Pixar Place is the only fully Pixar themed hotel in the United States.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up the Art of Animation Hotel down in Florida because when I was working on the Toy Story Hotel for Shanghai,
Mhm,
my creative pitch for that new hotel was always going to be childlike, but never childish. And to be honest, I see a lot of that same approach being applied now to Pixar Place down in Anaheim. They've got a number of items, little props and big props, like the supersized Luxo lamp that bounces on the top of the Pixar ball in the hotel's atrium lobby. They also have directly above that lamp a beautiful mobile of all of the stylized characters of the Pixar library. And each one of those items really does add this little bit of a touch of sophistication to the hotel. So it's definitely childlike in quotes, but never childish.
And what's interesting, at least to me, is that when you look at the interior of a hotel, and you were nice enough to go down and get some photographs just the other day. It looks like this time around definitely made some changes to the interior of, again, the hotel formerly known as the Emerald of Anaheim.
And it's worth noting here that, we talk about change, but,
Mhm,
and again, there's more change on the horizon because we've all followed the media this last week before we recorded. And
mhm.
there was the announcement about the $1.9 billion expansion that's been proposed for that area around the Pixar Place Hotel as part of what they're calling the Disneyland Forward project.
And what's kind of interesting is if you use the inflation calculator, that 1.9 billion, it's actually going to turn out to be less than the 1.4 billion that was proposed back in that was 2008 or thereabouts when they did the first redo of California Adventure.
But whatever the number finally ends up being, it looks like it may be that the construction walls around Pixar Place Hotel don't come down. They're just stored shortly in a safe location, to be brought back at a future date to be determined.
My big question is, so what does that mean? That, what color is the exterior of this hotel going to be painted next?
Well, we'll go check Magic 8 Ball, but until
Mm.
then, we're going to close this episode of Disney Unpacked Specialty Dish and bring it to a close.
And by the way, if you have any questions that relate to the stories we touched on in today's show, please send them along to contact@disneyunpacked.com, and we will answer your questions on a future edition of our Disney Unpacked Q&A podcast. Just a reminder that, that show, Q&A, is a monthly companion of the Disney Unpacked video series, which we're doing over on Patreon. Beyond that, Mr. Schul and I would like to thank Eric and Lauren Hersey for producing today's show. And beyond that, until next time, this is Jim Hill on behalf of Jim Schul, and we thank you for watching this specialty dish edition of Disney Unpacked.